Hello, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, college football fans, heck, college sports fans across the nation and around the world, especially those of you trying to get tickets to that first four in Dayton. This is Tim May with the Tim May Podcast. I welcome in one of those people trying to get tickets to that first four situation over in Dayton on Tuesday night, his beloved Wyoming Cowboys. That's right, ladies and gentlemen, even though he covers Ohio State football and a little bit of basketball prolifically, this man was born a cowboy. A cowboy's got a ride. He wants to ride over to Dayton to see his beloved Wyoming Cowboys take on Indiana. I'm already predicting an upset in that game. But Austin Ward, welcome back to the co-pilot seat to the Tim May Podcast, my man.
Thank you. Ready to head over to the home of the Flyers and enjoy a nice Tuesday evening, taking my bride, who didn't go to Wyoming like I did, but spent some time there working at the Casper Star-Tribune, my hometown newspaper. So she has some brown and gold in the closet, and we'll head over and watch the Pokes beat the Hoosiers. We were fortunate enough to, not get totally destroyed by the Scalpers on Sunday night when that matchup was announced, but certainly not the same amount of money that I would have paid to go see Wyoming back in 2002 during another famous postseason run for the Pokes.
Yep.
Long time coming for this program. I know people aren't tuning in to hear about Wyoming basketball, but there's a lot of excitement. That basketball was always my first love, and they've been far more successful, my alma mater, on the hardwood than they have the gridiron traditionally. So I know there's a lot of relief that they've been able to rebuild this program back to get to this level, and we're going to enjoy a Tuesday night in Dayton. And you and I both know it's a fun event over there. We've covered it a number of times. This will be the first time that I can do it, be in the first four and enjoy that atmosphere a little bit more, so to speak. But I'm really excited, Tim.
I know you are, man. I know you are. That's why I brought it up, even though we talk mainly about Ohio State sports, Ohio State football in particular. I mean, nothing like your nothing like your childhood team, your hometown team, getting into the big dance. And by the way, I was just stunned that your wife's first job was at the Casper Star-Tribune. How did she? Well, we won't go into too much depth, but that's crazy. Where was she from originally?
She's from Columbus.
Oh my goodness.
Way life works, Tim. I mean, it's.
Is that where her car broke? Wait a minute. Is that where her car broke down on her way to paradise?
She left. She left Columbus, to go to school in Syracuse. So she left home.
Okay. That still doesn't add up.
It gets her journalism degree at Syracuse, prestigious journalism school.
Yep.
And, wanted a, health reporting job. Casper Star-Tribune is one of the great small town, quote unquote, newspapers that you'll find anywhere, a launching pad for a number of careers. She took that as her first job. Certainly didn't expect to leave there, finding a future husband, I don't believe. And she definitely had no intention of eventually winding back in Columbus, which she didn't choose to. She followed me to Tennessee first, and then I wound up bringing her home, as you all know.
Yep.
Cover the Buckeyes. So it's funny how life works, because I wasn't, by the time that she had started in Casper, I wasn't even there. I was toying it with graduate school at Tennessee, and doing some streaming for the Knoxville News Sentinel then, and I decided that wasn't the life for me. I had obviously done some, maybe not obviously, I had worked for the Star-Tribune while in college as a freelancer and stringer while I was finishing up school. I called them up and said, hey, I think I really want to do this. I needed a little bit of time to figure it out. You think you have a job for me? Yep, come home. And I remember, I'll never forget, actually, seeing Allie on my first day of work there. She doesn't. I wasn't as important to her at that point, but she was in Casper and had just started her career. Then I showed back up in my hometown, and the rest is a little bit of history.
Rest is marital bliss is what it is. I mean, becoming a health reporter in Casper, I mean, I would think that there's few places in America that have more rarefied air than Casper. That'd be a great place to be a health reporter, huh?
That's right. And
good news today, ladies and gentlemen. Health is still good. Go ahead now.
You can go outside, and Saturday is our anniversary. So we had been thinking, man, well, what do we want to do? We got to plan ahead. It's a little bit harder now with Liberty being close to 5.
Yep.
Life gets more complicated, and So we had my in-laws were going to take her on Friday night. We still didn't know what we were going to do. I said, well, I told her yesterday, so there's a chance that Wyoming is going to be in Dayton in the first 4. Like, obviously I want to go, and we think we can switch the nights. So how lucky am I that not only I find this woman in Casper in my hometown, but that she loves sports enough that she's all about it. Yeah, Dayton, let's go. First 4. That sounds like an anniversary party. I mean, I'm lucky, man. And
Yes,
in a lot of ways. So it's really cool how it all came together. It's a unique story, of course, especially coming back to Columbus and her hometown and her family and all that. But it just makes you wonder, like, who's pulling the strings for all this stuff?
that's what's funny. What I'm wondering is not anything to do with that. My wondering is Casper High School, was their nickname the Ghosts? Was their favorite football play Ghost to the Post?
So they did actually adopt at one point, not the high school. My high school was the Kelly Walsh Trojans.
Oh, it was. Golly.
Yeah.
Well, that screws it all up. But go ahead now.
But the rookie A-ball team that was in Casper, that was an affiliate of the Colorado Rockies. For a while, they were just the Casper Rockies. That was one of my first jobs, was working like on-field promotions for this rookie A-League team. And they didn't draw particularly well. It's rookie A-ball. Most places don't.
Yeah.
And one of the things that they decided to do was like, well, we're too much like the Rockies. They won't buy our logo. We're not different. We're not different enough. And so they switched to the Casper Ghosts, and they, for like a year or two, got a ton of publicity and people buying their merch. They did glow in the dark hats, to set apart, because then these people that collect minor league hats got to have a Casper Ghost hat. They're super cool and unique. So they did. There was a time that they actually did in Casper adopt that nickname. For the most part, though, people who had actually lived there had tried to avoid it. So it was kind of like they forced it on Casper when we didn't want it. But that's the situation.
Yeah, I mean, you gotta have that international appeal. It can't just cater to the locals because they ebb and flow with the wins and the losses.
That's right.
Hey, I appreciate you taking me down that lane, man. That was interesting. Interesting story. How people end up where they are. How you and I met. Because it's just we'll get into that one of these other days. But this is an interesting podcast because I'm trying to keep it kind of short. But I got an interview with Joshua Perry, former Ohio State football player, former NFL player. Obviously now his television career is burgeoning as we speak. I mean, Big Ten Network, Bally Sports Network, which takes him to Chicago a lot now. I've got another interview with him. He's back on the Tim May podcast. We're talking about mental health, with the revelation, as you scooped everybody on, the revelation over the last week of Harry Miller issuing that very interesting, insightful, deep message to folks via his one of his social media accounts, that he's stepping away from football and how he had contemplated suicide at one point, went to Ryan Day for help. This is a guy that was a 5-star prospect out of Buford, Georgia, who we thought had everything going for him, maybe as intelligent a fellow as we've ever covered, in Ohio State football. Definitely, he could quote authors. He went on goodwill trips to Nicaragua, just annually, et cetera. Just seemed to have everything going for him. But it just shows you mental health can be real for a lot of people just when you think they've got it all going for them. And we've seen that a few times now with Ohio State football since they've established the portal, for one of another term, for these fellas to get help, just within the program there. Chelsea Day and that group, Dr. Chelsea Day, who I had on my podcast last summer, talking about that, and how Ryan Day has made it so easy for these guys. Easy may be the wrong word to use there, but for them to seek help, that they feel comfortable seeking him out when they've got a problem. And of course, we know what he dealt with as a youngster, losing his dad to suicide. And it's just, to me, it's an interesting facet now, because it is definitely a hot topic in sports now of people having trouble, and now, instead of just being introverts about it, seeking help. And I know you agree with me on that.
Yeah. And I mean, reading the letter you have to do it, or you should, I think, 2 or 3 times.
Yeah.
to let everything that he mentions in there sink in, because it's the word, I could describe it so many different ways. It's beautifully written. It's haunting to think about it in another way of how it could have gone as he writes. And when you were talking about all the things that all of his other interests and his intelligence, I mean, he's the only one, I think, who could have written a letter like this. And you hope that has the impact that maybe he wants. I don't think he wrote it just purely, to get the plaudits.
No,
because that's most people don't ever want to talk about those darkest moments of their life. And that's why the number one term that I keep coming back to in all these other ways to describe it is how courageous it was for him to do it. And you and I know that, going into the Minnesota game last year, there was something amiss, and lots of, conversations about it being related to mental health. I don't know about you, but I never got the sense that it was to this extent, this severe, that he had been willing to take it to that length. And I think part of that is only he can talk about that, only he can write about that, and only he should.
Yes.
So that's not to say that that I was looking to report on anything about it. I wasn't. I had conversations, and I knew that, and they didn't know when he was going to come back, when he was going to feel mentally right. And those things are difficult for everyone to talk about. And we're all still trying to get better at it and learn how. And it would have, you think about maybe the way it would have been talked about in the 1950s and Junction Boys, or 60s and 70s, whatever. And hey, just buck up and battle through it. I mean, I think, Harry Miller and Ryan Day, they're fortunate that they had found each other, that wasn't going to be the approach at Ohio State. And I'm not saying that this is the only place that could have been the case, that they would have treated it this way or helped him that way. But,
right.
They found each other in a way that maybe saved lives and could save more lives down the road, because they're both, advocates now for it, willing to talk about it, do whatever to help. And like I said, it just stings to think about and then put into context, the death threats that happened 2 years ago, and the social media attacks on Harry Miller. And nobody knows what was the trigger, but he certainly talked about that last off season, how much it hurt him and how difficult it was. And he was trying to use it as a growth opportunity. But, these things are just hard to assess and hard to deal with.
Yeah.
There's no way to segue from that. I mean,
I know. I'm just stunned because social media has its place. I get, the hair on the back of my neck stands up a lot, and it just stood up because, man, the pressure that is on these young men, the expectation factor is at the root of it. When you come out of Buford, Georgia as a 5-star recruit, you're expected to contend immediately, even on the offensive line, which is crazy. Back in the good old days before 1972, and that changed a few times during the war years and stuff, but freshmen didn't play, they weren't eligible to play. Joe Namath wasn't eligible to play as a freshman at Alabama in 1961. For example, that's a guy I go back to, like you're a Wyoming guy. I go back to that. And now, with the proliferation of recruiting coverage, people almost treat football players like basketball players. A basketball player can come off of a high school team and all these travel teams and league teams they play in and contribute immediately to a possible national championship season. We've seen it before. We've seen it many times, but football is a totally different animal, especially the bigger the position you're playing, from a physical standpoint. But right. I'm just thinking about Harry Miller dealing with the expectations, dealing with being banged up and still dealing with expectations. That's what Joshua Perry and I talk about, because Joshua Perry even admits that when he was in the NFL, he sought counseling finally to deal with some of that, just the pressures of what's wrong with this guy? Why isn't this guy playing? Or, you're even asking yourself, what could I do better? Where can I get better? How do I deal with this ridiculous competition factor that I wasn't dealing with in high school, when I was the biggest man, maybe not even on the block or in the conference, but maybe in the state, and all of a sudden you get to an Ohio State, and like we're watching that open practice last week, and you're going, man, there's some talent running around out there on that field. Look at the defensive backs. I mean, look at the safety position. And they're all vying to be those next 2 or 3 guys that step up, and just dealing with that is crazy, especially when you then get banged up and then maybe things don't go as well as you thought they would when you finally get your shot. And it's not all to do with that at all. I'm sure with Harry Miller, but that has a lot to do with it, right?
It has to be. And, none of us could say, or we're not going to be able to diagnose it. That's way above our pay grade about all the things that we weigh in on. That one for sure we're not equipped to do. But I think the other part, when I just look at Harry Miller and the person that we got to know, and Berm especially, dating back to his recruitment and the way that he talked to, Harry and Christina Miller, is like, I don't know that there's any. It's a short list. He's got to be in the top 5 of the players that I know that Berm, people, not just players, that he respects more than anyone else he's dealt with. And our experiences over 3 years, when you're talking about all of his various interests, it never would have surprised me if at some point Harry Miller just decided, I don't want to play football anymore.
Yeah.
Not, completely separate from any of this stuff.
Yeah.
I'm going to become a musician, or I'm going to be, the world's greatest engineer. I'm going to invent something, or
missionary,
be a poet, or I'm going to move to Nicaragua. I mean, he's a man who he's the closest thing, I think, to a true Renaissance man that I've dealt with, certainly in football, but almost in any walk of life. He's one of the smartest people, most skilled people, talented, personable people that I've ever met, inquisitive. I remember one night, I think you were sitting in there.
Yeah.
We were sitting in the lobby, and he had a media availability, and everyone's still just trying to process all the things he said. And then he came out, and I think me, you, and Berm were sitting in there. Maybe I'm struggling to remember, but
go ahead. Yeah.
And he just started talking about his, UFOs and and started talking about alien life forms and the possibility of that, and for half an hour. And he didn't want to go home. He didn't care who we were. He knew who we were, but he wanted to. He just wasn't done talking. He wanted to get other people's thoughts on things, and that's the stuff that'll stick with me, because I feel like, man, you don't need to do this to play football to succeed in anything. And I think that he knows that, and I think that that's kind of hidden away in that letter, that maybe that's not the right avenue for him moving forward, where the rest of his life seemed like it was always geared towards that. Yeah. As you're talking about the 5-star expectations, and I can't. I just give him all the credit in the world, and I hope that he's happy and healthy and got the results and outcome here that he wants, because he deserves it. And it's scary how close it was to going the other way.
Yeah, fellas like that, man. I just wish I was half that smart, but fellas like that, that they have a constant tug of war going on in their head of thoughts, because they're thinking about a lot of things, in depth. How do you help the Nicaraguan children, which he has become so attached to? I mean, that mission down there, and but how do you, he would quote from literature, big time classic literature. I mean, all these thoughts where he knows he could go and become a success, and yet they're all pulling at him, because a guy like that wants to excel in probably all of those avenues. And yet, he knows his initial claim to fame, and he's not stupid. He knows his initial claim to fame is being a great football player. And that's not necessarily what he wants to be, and I'm not trying to put words in his mouth, but that he's got so many other things that in his mind probably have a higher priority in terms of what the world needs, but he also is a really good football player, and he wants to maximize that, just like he's playing the guitar. He probably wants to be Feliciano one of these days. I mean, who knows? That's the kind of mental gymnastics guys like him, and even Joshua Perry. You've been around Joshua Perry. Joshua Perry has all kinds of thoughts going on all the time, man. He and I talk about that in this interview. And, along with this burgeoning broadcasting career, television career, he's a pretty well-respected, successful real estate agent,
Right.
and talk about a time to be a real estate agent. But I digress there. I've only said it once. But these guys, they're all different, and that's what that's what I embrace. What Ryan Day has done, he and his wife, especially Nina, with that fund they've got at Children's Hospital that deals with mental challenges, psychological challenges for youth, et cetera. It starts then, when you realize you can be different, and different means you got a lot more thoughts going on than the average guy, or you can't get your mind off of negatives, blah, blah, blah. And Joshua Perry and I talk about that in this following interview. But you have any other quick thought before we get to the interview?
I feel like we could talk about it forever, but I just, I think that, a lot of it, I don't want to speak for him. I think that we both said enough about his various interests, and that's our informed speculation about what, may have happened. And I feel confident that at some point, knowing the kind of person Harry Miller is, and especially after doing this and getting the more challenging part. So, just to look at it, that first mention of it, writing it down, I think with the outpouring of support, and then what he also mentioned that he would have a chance moving forward to potentially be in a support role. And, I don't know exactly what that'll entail, but I would bet that, after this step is out of the way, that Harry Miller will be more, vocal about what he went through. I'm sure that he'll be, telling this story and trying to help others with it. And that's, I think, the silver lining from a pretty dark cloud is that, that Harry Miller will be able to take that experience, and he's equipped to help people with it in a way that not a lot of people are. And the letter, man, I'll say it, just incredible writing.
Yeah.
The content of it just breaks your heart in two, but I don't know. I'm so impressed and with that part of it. I know that doesn't sound like the right word for it in the situation, but he is a really special human. And I mean that.
Well, you and I are sports writers, man. It's hard to come up with those special words. Here's what is that thing could have been probably 30 more pages long minimum,
Right.
And with him, it was in his mind. And, I thought he encapsulated the impetus for why he wanted to do it, because of that, Ryan Day got asked this the first day of spring football, what's wrong with Harry Miller?
Yeah.
And now we know, and wrong. That has all kinds of connotations, but now we've gotten some insight. And, let's move on to my interview here with Joshua Perry, talking about that and some other, high profile, situations that went on with people dealing with some mental challenges, some psychological challenges, not the least of which was Kevon Pope suddenly leaving the field last year in the middle of a game. And not that he, but it just shows you these young athletes, either self-inflicted or real, are under a lot of pressure, and you never know when that tea kettle is going to kind of blow. And it's good. It's just tough because that help is there if they want it and seek it out, especially at Ohio State now. So without further ado, let's get to my interview with Joshua Perry. Welcome again, ladies and gentlemen, to the Tim May podcast. Joshua Perry, one of my favorite people of all time, who also happened to be a football player of some repute. Joshua Perry, welcome again to the Tim May podcast.
Always glad to get the invite. I know it's generally we keep it fun and lighthearted today. I know we're going to get into some serious topics, but it's always a good time when I get to join.
Well, we are going to talk about what you see early in the Big Ten. What's your gut telling you about the 2022 Big Ten race, just in a nutshell. But I did want to touch on this, because touch on it's not the right term. I wanted to sit on it for a while. Is that we saw the open letter that Harry Miller sent to Ohio State fans and media last week, basically talking about, number one, he was retiring from football, but then number two, he's a former center at Ohio State. big time 5-star recruit out of Buford, Georgia, one of the big time gets by Ryan Day and his staff a few years ago. And, he indicated or revealed in that letter that he had actually had suicidal thoughts, may have even acted on it to a certain extent, sought help from Ryan Day, Ohio State head coach, about this. And Ryan Day, of course, we all know, the Ryan and Nina Day Fund at Children's Hospital in Columbus, how much they are into this. Ryan Day lost his dad to suicide way back when he was a youngster. And but it's just, I just wanted to touch on this because you retweeted a tweet from a Temple football player who talked about stepping away from the game to deal with maybe some mental challenges, psychological challenges he's touching on. Now, I'm telling you, 10 years ago, 5 years ago, you probably wouldn't have seen this, if at all. Joshua, what are we seeing right now? And it is a good thing, but how good a thing is it for sports in general, college football in particular?
Yeah, I mean, I think this is reflective of just young people in society in general, where you see people who are leaving, not just the sports world, but big job opportunities or whatever the case is, different things to protect their mental health and to really focus on themselves. And that's been a big part of this new generation of young people, is to ensure that they are in the proper mental space and that they're doing the self-care things right. Because if you're not good to yourself, you can't be good for others. Looking in on athletics, Harry Miller sharing with us, which I definitely appreciate, and I reached out to him, and I'm hoping all the best for him into the future. But that is courageous because he's not the only one. And then you mentioned the player from Temple who basically within the same week revealed a similar thing. You can go back to a couple of weeks ago where the student athlete from Stanford had committed suicide, right?
Yeah.
And so these things they're not totally uncommon, but they're not shared very often. And so I think for somebody, especially somebody as bright and somebody as, you feel like you want to attach yourself to their future, like Harry Miller. I think it's really important for the future of sports. I hope this type of thing continues. I actually spoke to somebody this weekend who is going to be a dentist. He's in school right now, and he was playing Division I football on scholarship, and he became a starter. His grades totally dipped. And then there was a stress from him being the starting quarterback as well, in a situation where he felt like, there wasn't the support from the coaching staff and everybody else. And so he's like, okay, I'm not enjoying playing football and my grades are terrible. I can't become a dentist. So he left college football and went to a different school, and now he's in dental school. And I think that's also a part of this journey too for young athletes is, this is fun for a lot of us until it's not. Yeah. And the whole reason any of us ever started playing ball was because it was fun. We were kids, we were running around, we were having a great time. To the point where the game becomes something other than fun, I think we're going to see more athletes say, this isn't what I signed up for. And maybe they're leaving a scholarship on the table in the process of doing that. But the priority, I think, for a lot of people moving forward is, if I'm going to spend my time doing something, I want it to be something I enjoyed. I want it to be something that's fulfilling. I think gone are the days where people are just going to be tortured for 4 years at a time and say, well, you know what, it was for the experience, or this is how it's always been done, so I'm going to do it like this. I think that's changing. You can see the landscape with, transfer portal and everything is going to make that a little bit easier, just in terms of players calling their own shot too.
Yeah. I mean, yeah. And, that opens a Pandora's box from the standpoint of, where do you go? Who do you see? Who do you trust? Yep. Do you ever reveal something like that? Do you see it as weakness? I think the evolution going on right now is that more and more athletes are attacking this or embracing it. It may not be the right word, but acknowledging it, but then you have the young lady at Stanford who seemed to have everything going for her.
Everything going.
And boom, I mean, she'd had a conversation with her mom, and was upbeat, et cetera. And a few hours later, she was gone. And so you don't, it's, I guess what I'm getting to you is, I'm not looking for a liability here. You're a real estate guy in your off time. as opposed to just your Big Ten network duties and Bally's network duties. But you're not a psychologist in your off time, I don't think, right?
No, but I mean, I could spread myself a little bit thinner and maybe add that.
A little bit thinner. Yeah. But you know where I'm going. I mean, it's like, where do you go if in fact you're feeling these things? And is it your sense? You played football at Ohio State at a high level, national championship. You played in the National Football League. One of the tenets of that, and it's a cliche, but be tough, man. Don't admit that somebody's getting to you. Whatever. Stay in the mindset of you've got to achieve. You've got to be the starter. You've got to be this and that and the other, as opposed to admitting any kind of mental weakness or psychological weakness. And so, is it your sense that we are seeing a thaw there, a definite thaw there in that exactly in that approach, I guess?
Yeah, I mean, I think there needs to be a paradigm shift if it hasn't already kind of taken off in terms of how we view toughness, because I would say that what Harry Miller had done and what other people speaking out on their mental health and their experiences that have been very challenging and probably bring up some really bad feelings as they talk about them, I would say that is toughness rather than trying to handle things all on your own. And, it ends up generally being a detriment to yourself and a detriment to your team as well when you don't share those things. But I've never shared this story publicly before, but when I was playing in the NFL, I had dealt with stress and anxiety. I'm a very high tension person. I like to do a lot of things. I like to do them all well. And so it was manifesting in anxiety. And so I talked to one of my position coaches. And he was like, oh, well, you need to go talk to the team psychologist. And so I started doing that, got to know him really well. It was very beneficial. When I ended up getting released from the Chargers, the last thing the psychologist told me was, next time, if you have an issue like this, don't talk to the position coach, just come straight to the mental health professionals, because it's a bad thing. It's not viewed as a desirable trait to be a guy who goes to see the shrink. And I hope that is a changing sentiment, but with some of these old school football guys, that's how it's always going to be. And so at a place like Ohio State, where these guys are really fortunate, is Ryan has firsthand experience in what it means to take care of your mental health, because he's seen the other side of it. And so I feel like those guys are going to be confident if they have anything that they're worried about in terms of who can I talk to? You talk to the head guy, because he's invested in it. I'm just not exactly sure it's like that in a lot of places. And I'm also not sure offline what the conversations are like within the locker room or at the dorms. Just from player to player, can you share about your experiences? I got to catch up with JT Barrett a few weeks ago. I had a phenomenal time with him. And he's like, we need to just, like, once a week or once every 2 weeks, we need to get on the phone and we need to talk. Because as two young Black men, there aren't a lot of spaces where we can just open up and we can be vulnerable and we can share what's going well, but also the challenges that we have and how we're going to attack it and how we're going to manifest all the great things that we want to see happen in our lives. I think locker rooms need to become that space as well. So you can start there, and it's not a taboo to talk about mental health in the locker room. Shouldn't be a taboo to go and reach out to your coach about it. And coaches shouldn't hold that as a knock against the player. The other way around, you have somebody who realizes that they need help with something, they're asking for it. That should be something that you view as admirable instead of the other way around.
Let me ask you, how much stress comes, like I said, you showed up at Ohio State, a ballyhooed signee. How much stress comes from just showing up at a place where a year before you were lording over the football field, and now you're in competition just to get on the field to have a chance to play? How much stress does that put on young student athletes, who leave town, to a parade sometimes, and all of a sudden, just like with Harry Miller, we were asking what's up with Harry Miller, because, we weren't getting, we weren't entitled to get an answer, but we weren't getting the answer. And you don't necessarily want to pry,
Right.
But but it's clear. I mean, you guys show up much ballyhooed, like I said, with recruiting, et cetera, and then you get in line. How tough is that, do you think, on some young athletes to deal with that on top of starting to going to school and being responsible for getting up in the morning, et cetera? Go ahead.
No, it's difficult. I think it's difficult for everybody. It was difficult for me because you have the competition, which is going to be hard. And it's probably the first time you really had to compete for your spot, right? Like most guys who are going to a place like Ohio State, like you were the dude from freshman year. Like you weren't, there wasn't a matter of, are you going to get the starting job? It was a matter of what kind of stats am I going to put up in the game? And it's totally different when you get to Ohio State and you're a young player. For most guys, you got to compete. And for a majority of them too, it doesn't happen on the timeline that you really want it to happen on. You feel like you want to be in there day one. Everybody's goal is to become a starter. And for some guys, it takes, a few games. For other guys, it takes a couple of seasons to get to that point. And for some people, it never actually comes together. So there is a ton of stress. There is stress and anxiety that comes from expectations. And that would be your own personal expectations, but that's also expectations of people on the outside. You mentioned like the parades. Oh man, I'm the only Tangy kid who is playing football at Ohio State. Like people have expectations that they want to see Perry running around in the horseshoe. Yeah. And whether it's fair or not to internalize those expectations, that's what typically happens. And so there are the internal factors that cause stress. There are the external factors that cause stress. And I don't think anybody is not limited to being a collegiate athlete. There's nobody at 17 or 18 years old who is emotionally prepared for some of the stressors that do come up. And so the fact that, at least at this point, there are a lot of programs who are investing into the mental health coaches, not just the strength and conditioning coaches or the on-field coaches or on-court coaches, the mental health coaches. Yeah. It's necessary because young people, and this is, I'm going to get into the science, even though I'm not a scientist, but 18 years old, your brain is not fully developed yet. So there are a lot of factors that are going into the finalization of your brain development. And to have high stress and have anxiety and to have depression, it does change your brain chemistry for somebody who's still trying to get to a point where their brain is fully formed. I should say fully developed. So it's tough, but I think we're heading the right direction. I'm just not exactly sure it's happening quickly enough.
Yeah, I had Dr. Chelsea Day on my podcast back last summer, and I invite people to go and rewatch that or listen to it because, also had Taraja Mitchell on talking about some challenges he had. Ryan Day was on talking about how he's embraced may not be the right term, but has opened up things about letting people have a portal to, if they want to, incognito, go discuss their problems, et cetera, and get treatment.
Which is big.
What?
If you can go and you don't have to say who you are.
Right.
Like that's helpful for a lot of people because of this thing called shame that's associated with a perceived mental health issue or perceived weakness or perceived deficiency. You can take that out of there because you put that extra layer of being incognito. So I think that's important as well.
Yeah, but then past that, there are guys who show up at Ohio State with challenges, right? I mean, it's like, that's what I wanted to ask you is, how far does this go? I mean, how far does it go from a responsibility? I think if you have any kind of ailment, be it mental or physical, and you're a football player or an athlete at Ohio State, you should be privileged to treatment, et cetera, for whatever it is. I don't know. Where do you stand on that kind of situation? Because you were in the locker room, you saw guys deal with challenges. You dealt with challenges. Heck, I mean, how far does it go, in that regard?
Yeah, I mean, as far as you could imagine, it would go. And you're talking about, for some people, childhood trauma in their background, their upbringing, whether that is abuse, whether that's poverty, all those things become factors, and everything is intersectional. So you can't just say like, that's one part of your journey. It is one part of your journey, but it probably does filter in to other parts. And then you've got other kids who have always been high achievers. They've always had really good grades. They've always been really good at sports. There have always been expectations that they would achieve at whatever they could do. And that brings up another set of challenges as well. And it's not as negative because you have these challenges because it's a good thing, but there's still a challenge for you. And then all the other stuff in between. My personal thought on it is, I told you I started seeing a psychologist when I was playing football professionally. It was a team psychologist. I see a psychologist now. I believe that 99% of us need to be in counseling. I think that we need to see a mental health professional. I think we all have different trauma. I think we all have experiences that we wish that we could do over, that we replay in our heads. I think, we have relationship trauma, we have work trauma. Like there's all these different things that we're trying to compartmentalize. And like, who am I to try to think that I have all the answers to figure it out myself, when there are people who are professionals that they can identify to you what you're going through, and then they can give you a mechanism to help you through it. And so just general, I think all of us need to do it. But if you're a student athlete, there's 100% you should be in counseling of sorts, whether you feel like you need it or not, because there is a moment where every student athlete feels overwhelmed. It's like the middle of finals and you're preparing for a bowl game and you get a call from home that something's going on and life just stinks. Like it happens to everybody. I think it like day one, you should walk in and be able to talk to somebody and at least, develop a rapport and a relationship.
What is the biggest challenge for a student athlete? Is it answering the bell every day? Everybody gets nicked up physically. The most healthy you are is the last day of July, right? If you play football every year, right? Yeah. I mean, and then trying to play through that, but then that brings its own mental challenges, et cetera. Then you're trying to like maintain a spot or a position, and yet you're not 100%. You know that. You think the coaches maybe know that, but they're not showing you any slack because the train keeps moving down the track, right? I mean, how much of that is involved in this, do you think, Joshua?
A ton.
I slipped, by the way. I called you Josh. Sorry about that.
I know, but you know what? You caught yourself, and that's the important thing there.
Yeah.
I think the most difficult part, if I'm looking from my personal experience, is having to be on point every day. It's not like you get to show up and have a bad day at practice and like it's just okay to do that, or to consistently have, back-to-back bad days. Like, some coaches even have the mantra of no bad days or whatever the case is. And it's like, I get it because you do want to be on point, but it's like, I'm human. Like I'm going to have a bad day. Like, we all have them. And so that it's challenging. It's challenging to try not to do it. And then when you do, it's challenging to not kick yourself and feel like a piece of crud at times. And that is a constant thing. It's like in season, it's being on point in one way, but in the off season, it's being on point. It's just different. But it's something you got to do, and feeling like Urban's going to throw the attendance sheet up in the team meeting room. Like, and this is not to be an indictment on Urban, because I think that he did a really good job with some guys who I know were dealing with challenges of them dealing with it and not drawing attention that they didn't want to it. So I'm not saying this but Urban's he's gonna apply pressure because that's the way that he likes to coach. And so if I know he's putting the attendance sheet up and it's gonna tell somebody if you're late to class, if you missed class or whatever the deal is, I'm gonna be 5 minutes early to class. Even if that means that I'm not doing all of the other things for myself personally, I might have to, leave breakfast early or whatever the case is. So I'm not feeling great, but it's just what you deal with. You find a way to make it work. You got to be on point.
Yeah. Well, last thing in that regard though, how far can a coach let things slide is not the right term, but they've got a job to do too. They've got to put a starting unit on the field, a competent football team. Let's keep it in football vernacular on the field. they really can't afford to slow the train down too much, can they? For individuals, I mean, what do you think the pressure factor is for them, to still get, quote, the job done, despite the fact there might be some, for one of another term, some casualties along the way? What is your sense of that?
Yeah, I think that's the big challenge right now for coaches is finding the best way to run a program. So, is the old school thumping all the time at practice the way to do it? Because in one regard, you're going to have a really tough team, but in the other regard, like, is it actually necessary? Especially if you do know your team is tough already. Do you let the guys come in a little bit later and leave a little bit earlier so they don't feel like they're trapped at the Woody all day? And especially in a situation where free time is hard to come by in the first place. Like, what coaches are trying to do nowadays is they're trying to stay ahead of it. And so they're asking themselves these questions so they can avoid the issues down the line. They're trying to, in the offseason, ask their players like, hey, what can we do to help you? Do you need anything right now? How is everything going? It's really making sure that it doesn't become a problem. And it's hard because you can't prevent every situation. And some of these things come out of nowhere for some people. But I think if you're a coach and one of your concerns is how this is going to affect your team, I think it's open dialogue about it. But I think it's also making sure, like, hey, you know what? I'm going to stretch my legs so my hammy doesn't become a problem when I start running, instead of just getting out there, hitting the ground running. All of a sudden I blow a hammy and wonder why I did it. I think that's kind of the mentality there.
We all saw Kevon Pope leave the field last year in one of the most dramatic things I've ever seen on a football field in the midst of a game. A linebacker who had quite a bit of promise coming in a few years before, and things just didn't work out in the terms of maybe the way he thought, et cetera. And I've never spoken to him since, but I think that was for the whole world to see finally, about, for whatever reason, and for, why it happened then, who knows, things just tea kettled. I mean, just blew up. And I thought it was a stark example of the pressures players are under, both, like you said, self-inflicted pressures from the outside, et cetera. And they know their career, is going by, it's going by in a heartbeat. And
finite amount of time. Yeah.
Finite amount of time to play, to establish yourself, for one of a, who knows, to maintain a name, image, and likeness deal. Is it based on getting on the field, et cetera, prove who you are, you are. And yet, here's Ohio State, I think, with this good, if probably not the best situation for dealing with these psychological and mental challenges for players. It just shows that things can blow up quickly for some guys, right?
Yes, they can blow up very quickly. And, it's typically there's something that's underlying that was never addressed, but there's that moment where all of a sudden it's like, wow, this is very out of character. And it is out of character, but it's also like everything that was inside too, like a champagne bottle, the cork just flies out. Yeah. And so I think that's tough to see, because what happens in a situation like that is also you put yourself in harm's way. You jeopardize yourself, and you jeopardize the way people view you. Yes. And I know that was a tough situation for Pope, and I'm hoping that he can pick up the pieces, because I've talked to him a handful of times back at the Woody. Always thought that he was really engaging and fun, and to see that happen to a veteran guy in the program, it stinks, man. But I think it goes to show too, like, time starts ticking, and you're pressing, and especially when you feel like things aren't going well anyway, just didn't handle it very well. But there's a lot of guys that could have been too. Yeah, Antonio Brown. I mean, wow. Hey, real quick before we go, the new defense coordinator at Ohio State, Jim Knowles, we had a nice sit down with him the other day. And one of the things he talked about was he believes you can practice tackling without taking guys to the ground. Yes.
work on the fundamentals, the keys, et cetera, mentally take whatever. But he brought up a great example of what changed his mind on that was the loss of a friend of his, Tom McHale, a guy he played football with briefly at Cornell, was a friend of his, died of an overdose, like back in the mid 2000s. But this was a guy that he was one of the first brains. His wife donated his brain to the CTE. The CTE, what's it called? Not institute, but whatever, at Boston University to study the effects of concussions, et cetera. And it totally changed Jim Knowles' approach to defense, as he said, about you having to, the way you tackle, the way you practice, et cetera. Boy, that is another indication that the game, because it has to change from the coaching standpoint and filter down almost sometimes.
Yes.
But is it refreshing to you to know that guy is now the defensive coordinator at Ohio State, that he has run some really good defenses in the past at Oklahoma State and even at Duke. And that's his approach now, an enlightened, for want of another term, approach to the physical game of football.
Yeah, I love it. I think it's refreshing because he's right. I don't think you have to take guys to the ground and tackle at full speed to practice tackling. In 2014, when Chris Ash came in, he was a rugby style tackling guy. And so we spent a lot of the spring installing this new way of tackling. But we did it from stationary positions. We did it with guys who were basically on their knees instead of being totally stood up. So it takes less of the impact out of it. We were tackling on the crash pads, and we rarely went live tackle. And our tackling improved tremendously from 2013. And the reason is because you can break down the fundamentals, and guys aren't dumb, right? They understand the fundamentals, and they can rep each portion of the tackle without having to do the full thing. Number two, because tackling never happens perfectly. There are very rare opportunities where you will see a perfect form tackle in a football game. So it's about really emphasizing the important keys, not getting the perfect tackle. And then number three, and it's what Jim Knowles talked about, and this is what got me really excited about him, is not just how you keep your head out of the tackle, and you put your head behind instead of across the bow, which that had me excited because that takes out a lot of this right here, the helmet contact. But he talked about leverage. He talked about guys running to the football. That's what you practice. You practice running full speed and getting to the football. You don't have to take the guy down there, but you have to get to the guy with the ball. Yeah. And if you have three people hitting the ball, then he's going down. It doesn't have to be a perfect tackle. You have a guy you make sure he turns the ball back in. You have a guy who's running inside out, and then you have a guy who's filling straight down the middle. You should have 3 points of pressure on the football when you make a tackle. And he talked about making sure that guys are running and that they have good leverage. I'm like, man, he's a great coach because he keeps the game simple. Football is a simple game, and it doesn't have to be a lot of big collisions, and it doesn't have to be these stupid drills. Run and hit and run. That's it. And I love it.
Yeah. Hey, real quick, you've got kind of a new gig. You've been at it for a while now with Bally's, the Bally's network and stuff. And you're coming back because you're a man of some acclaim there on the Big Ten network now and stuff too. But how excited about your future in the broadcast industry?
Oh man, it's a lot of fun. I'm super excited. The opportunity I took with Bally, it's very different than anything I've done, in my media career. We cover all sports on a national show. We do it daily. And so it's a great challenge because it's making me step outside of just football, which I'm really enjoying. And it's a daily show. So there's a lot of content, and you got to be on point and get your mind right to come in and have a good take on something every single day. And then it's in Chicago, which is really awesome for where I'm at with Big Ten Network too, because I'm right down the street now from BTN studio. So it kind of put me closer to the thing that really got me into the media world. It's also presenting some different challenges for me to become better as a broadcaster. And then, because we talked about my 20 jobs, I still got the real estate gig going back in Columbus too. I've got a little partnership there, so I can I can sell the real estate without having to be in the city. So your boy's got some things going on.
Yeah. Real quick though, did you see yourself? Let's go back to Joshua Perry 10 years ago. Was broadcasting on your radar? Or was it in your sights?
No, it was not on my 5 or 10 year plan. My 5 or 10 year plan included becoming Columbus's next big real estate mogul, but it did not have broadcast in it. And I started, doing pregame with the Fan, and I was doing Charter Spectrum post-game my first year out of football, and then BTN called me. I absolutely love it. I think it is the greatest job ever. Me and you have this in common. We're long-winded people. Yeah. And so I have a platform to be long-winded, and I absolutely enjoy it.
I was going to say, there's nothing beats being able to give your viewpoint on something that everybody else is talking about, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Yes.
Hey, Joshua, real quick before we go, Ohio State did not win the Big Ten last year in football.
No. Shocking.
Yes. What do you expect in 2022? Just give me a succinct take on here in early March about what you're seeing headed down the road for the 2022 football season in the Big Ten. Could we see a repeat of last year, aka Michigan? Because I think they feel like now they've reinvented football again.
They reinvented their coaching staff too, because
reinvented their coaching staff again. Just what's your take, man? I mean, is Ohio State going to reascend? Like I keep saying, if Ohio State's just 25% better on defense, it rules the roost again. It could be wrong. Go ahead.
No, but you can end the conversation right there. Like I really don't think it's that complicated. Ohio State is going to have the best offense in the Big Ten again, probably a top 3 or a top 5 offense nationally, and they just need to get a couple more stops, which I'm sure they're going to be able to do this year. Like you look at it, and it was very disappointing, but it's also, I think it shows how spoiled of a fan base we can be, and I include myself in that. Not just calling out fans here, because you win 12 games or whatever the case is, and it's a bad season. Yeah. And people are calling for coaches' jobs, and they're reevaluating personnel, and they're looking at recruiting, and they're trying to find whatever the issue is. It's like it's not really that big of an issue. Like you went 12-2, you won a Rose Bowl. Like it's hard for me to say that there are a ton of problems within the program. And Jim Knowles, I believe, is going to have the defense better than it was a year ago. And I think that's going to put them right back in the college football playoff conversation. It's pretty simple to me.
Ladies and gentlemen, nobody makes it simpler than Joshua Perry. Joshua Perry, thank you once again for joining the Tim A podcast, my man.
Hey, really appreciate it.
I always appreciate Joshua Perry's insight, man. One of the great individuals we've covered at Ohio State, covering Ohio State football, but also one of the great human beings I've met. His dad's one of my favorite people also, but it's always cool having Joshua Perry's insight, isn't it?
Yeah, I wonder how he's going to balance that future as the president of the United States with all this other stuff going on. I mean,
I don't know. His Final Four bracket will be stout, though, I'm sure. But yeah, is he going to be able to do Big Ten Network things on the weekend in Bally Sports while he's president? I think he probably could work that in, if he gets the right advisors. What do you think?
If anybody can, it'd be Joshua Perry.
Yeah, I tell you, he give a hell of a stump speech. I'm just telling you that right now.
Right.
If in fact they even use stumps anymore, he give a hell of a social media speech. But it was interesting there at the end. When I asked him, just kind of threw it in there. What do you see? What do you see coming? And just from here, you're sitting here in early March. What do you see coming in the Big Ten football rankings this week? And he I'm paraphrasing here, but he basically said, hit the default button because he thinks Ohio State's going to go back where it once was. And as I keep saying, I've said this on our post-practice reports sponsored by Buyers Auto that and a couple of other places, Ohio State's only got to get about 25% better on defense and look out, and of course, Jim Knowles is intending to get so much better than that, but he sees Ohio State getting back to ruling the roost. And I think you agree with that assessment, don't you, Austin?
I do. And especially it's 2 practices and they didn't have pads on. You want to be careful.
I'm not talking about what we saw. Yeah, but go ahead.
But that is also what makes it harder to not think that Ohio State is going right back in to dominating the Big Ten, getting back to the college football playoff, and potentially winning a national title this year, because the talent is undeniable. I mean, as we touched on earlier, I've been places, even in the SEC, where you walk out there and you see the roster and you can see where the holes are right away.
Yeah.
You can see that 1 through 85, it is not the same athletically. This team right now, and I would include 19 and 14 and 15, like, out of what I've seen, I think on paper, this is maybe the most talented, gifted, physically imposing Ohio State team that I've ever seen. And by default, that means one of the best assembled in the country. And, I don't see a weakness on this team. So if part of that last year was that the coaching wasn't up to that championship level, and certainly that was Ryan Day's view by making these changes with Jim Knowles and bringing in Tim Walton and Perry Eliano and on the offensive line as well with Justin Fry, then that 25% you're talking about, that doesn't seem like that big of an ask. Every position, who's going to play defensive tackle? Well, here comes Teron Vincent and Jerron Cage and Tyleek Williams and Ty Hamilton. You have more than enough defensive ends. Linebacker wasn't good enough last year. Well, you have 6 or 7 guys to fit into 2 spots. Well, what about the secondary? They weren't okay. Well, Denzel Burke and a healthy Cam Brown and Josh Proctor will be back in a couple of weeks, and Court Williams is healthy and out there, and Ronnie Hickman. I mean, and that, like, it
goes on and on.
It goes on. Like, that's just the front line unit. You have these guys, like, we were standing there right in front of the secondary. They're going through some of those drills for the first time with Walton and Eliano.
Yeah.
They're working on takeaways, and they're in a line. And you see, I wrote about him on Monday morning, Legend Cavazos.
Yeah.
Pretty coveted recruit. It's a big deal. Ohio State, lost him for a bit, brought him back in. They wanted him. He's kind of in this sandwich in the middle where that Jordan Hancock is pushing and Denzel Burke and Cam Brown are already established, and you don't think about, these guys that are in maybe year 3 or, hasn't happened for them, a redshirt junior perhaps. Like, it's like you forget about them. And also, they were top 100 players. They're 4-star, maybe even 5 stars in some cases. And they slip out of your mind, but then you walk out on the field and it's like you think about the other success stories, like a Devon Hamilton or a Jayshon Cornell or, whoever, a late bloomer, because Ohio State has this remarkable knack of developing guys, and they don't have to play in year 1 or year 2, and then they become superstars in NFL draft picks, at Terry McLaurin, whatever. I mean, go down the list of that too. Like, then you just see it. It's like, these athletes are incredible.
You know what I've called that, in snippets and videos and stuff we've done, I've called that the embedded talent of a big time program that finally gets its shot. Of course, I thought that was going to be the case with the linebackers last year, but the embedded talent just stayed embedded, for the most part. I'm talking about, some guys who'd stuck around and paid the price because we'd seen, the benefits of that with Justin Hilliard, Pete Werner. Although Pete Werner, like you pointed out, Pete Werner was playing pretty much from the get-go. Justin Hilliard was hindered by injuries, et cetera, in his career, finally came to the fore. But you're right. I mean, you see that, and just a microcosm is the secondary and the players involved there. I want to ask you this, though, and I brought this up on one of our videos. The question, the jury's still out for me because you got to see it. You actually have to see it happen. You and I have talked about this before. Is that defensive line going to be as dominant as it appears it could be? Because it was not last year. Yeah. I don't think I'm talking about against the better talent, the big time, better talented teams with offensive lines. Do you think who is that? Keep this short. Give me those 2 guys in the middle that you think could give you that feel that, yes, this is going to be a special group. Just like on the offensive line, they brought in Justin Fry to fix some things, one of which is short yardage. You got to be able to make 3rd and 2. You got to be able to make 3rd and 2 running the ball. Because Ryan Day is not satisfied with just throwing the ball all over the lot. Although, in my opinion, when you're that good at it, you probably should anyway. But, that vice you've got to have on both the offensive line and the defensive line from just a pure physical dominant standpoint. Do you see that coming to the fore with this defensive line group? And I'm talking about, we know about the defensive ends. I'm talking about the collection of tackles.
Yeah. I think what Teron Vincent showed in the Rose Bowl is the kind of performance that really everybody's been waiting forever.
He got after it. He got after it.
The number one defensive tackle recruit in the country when he was on the way, when he was signed at Ohio State, and a bunch of injuries, just, a string of them three times, in a row, knocking him out, not letting him reach his full potential. And, I think we talked about either last week or the week before, just the names that were coming up, but from the former Buckeyes that were at the NFL Combine. Who are they talking about? Yeah. And when you talk to an offensive lineman like Thayer Munford, or when you talk to Tyreek Smith or Haskell Garrett, it's Teron Vincent.
Yeah.
And as you said, you still have to see it consistently. And I thought he played much better as the season went on. And it can be hard when you haven't had an opportunity to be out there game after game, snap after snap, to become the kind of player that you want. But if that corner has been turned and he gets a little bit of that health luck, I think you saw in the Rose Bowl what a force he can be on the inside.
Yeah.
The one thing that I saw on Tuesday that, is just a detail that in the grand scheme, it goes right out of your mind. But, we're standing there in Tyleik Williams. They go from the stretching on one end. I think they were over there on the east end zone, and they blow the whistle, and they're going to do the rushman drills on the west side. And he's sprinting with a manager, quality control. I don't know what position it was. I haven't met this gentleman yet, but they sprint 100 yards to the other side of the field. Tyleik Williams is racing. If what kept him last year was the conditioning and getting the body right, we saw what he could do by the middle of the season, and everyone said, well, why is he not playing more? But physically, he didn't have that yet. And I think that's just like one sprint, but if that's the way that he's attacking, this is what it's got to be. I got to be in better shape. I got to push myself physically. I can't be worn down. I can't let them take me out of a game. If that's the way he's approaching that, winter workout, spring ball, look out, because that guy can do everything on the inside, and Larry Johnson will have a field day with him.
Yeah, that was if we were like trading off, who you're looking at, yours was going to be Teron Vincent, mine was going to be Tyleik Williams, but instead you took both answers because that wasn't the premise. But you're exactly right. And I'm telling you, if you watched Georgia, if you watched the Los Angeles Rams finally, when it was right down to what in time, as you guys call it, the Cowboys call it out there in Wyoming. Whatting time. Yes, whatting time. You've got to have one or two of those A-gap sons of guns. I have another name for them, but they set the tone. They can change a football play in a heartbeat. And I think if Teron Vincent, from that second half on, that defense played with a savage approach, which, wow, you hadn't seen really all year. Yeah, they gave up that late drive because of some pass interference calls, which were basically apropos. But the way they attacked Utah's front in that second half, especially, and then you see the improvement that Teron Vincent and Tyleik Williams, for example, can bring to the fore there. Yes, I do believe the makings are there, but like you said, we've got to see it. And boy, the opener against Notre Dame, we'll be talking about this forever. But what a showcase that could be for a new look Ohio State defense. You agree, right?
100%.
And the other thing I wanted to throw in there before we go, you and I talk a lot about different guys, and one of the more intriguing players, I think, in the transfer, who came from the transfer portal, but transferred in. He's going from running back to linebacker. Is Chip Trayanum. And the reason I bring him up, the kid originally from the Akron area, Northeast Ohio, went out to Arizona State to be a big-time running back, decided he wanted to come back home and be a big-time linebacker. As he says, he's going to revolutionize linebacker play, I think is what the word he used when we got to talk to him back in January or February. But my point is, one of the first guys Jim Knowles talked about, it was brought up to him, but Chip Trayanum, and how he has hit the ground running as a linebacker because he has a lot to bring to bear if, in fact, he can harness it right. But it was interesting the way he spoke of him. And of course, Jim Knowles, defensive coordinator, works with the linebackers, but that was intriguing, wasn't it?
It was, and I asked about him for a reason, because I'm also intrigued by this idea of.
Wait a minute, my guy is Josh Proctor. Is he your guy this spring? Go ahead now.
I'm going to talk about him a lot this spring, I think.
Yeah.
And, I watched a little bit of, the past video, and whether that was at running back or some of his high school stuff where he was playing defense. Herman and I talked to him in December, and there was something about his personality and the way he talked about the opportunity, and the obvious physical makeup, I think, can translate no problem. And he seems to have tacked on like 20 pounds of muscle since he got here.
Yeah.
The dude is imposing, and he can run. Like, we know all that. So, and I know I was told that he had an interception, during the periods of practice after we got kicked out on Tuesday. Pads are not
kicked
on.
Out. Wait a minute. I like the way you said that. Kicked out. Now go ahead.
Yeah. When Quinn's like, Jerry, take care of these guys. There's something about it that is intriguing to me, because I thought for a long time that Steel Chambers needed to play linebacker. And I know that Ohio State felt that way during his recruitment, that was where his best future was. And maybe part of the interest in Chip Trayanum is because Ohio State just pulled this off, and that Steel Chambers by the end of last year was arguably the most impactful defensive player that Ohio State had, almost out of the blue. And I know how much better he can be with a full year. And I just think, like, how quickly can Chip Trayanum do this? He played at a Power 5 level. He was a successful running back.
Yeah.
He just seems to have a mental capacity for it. Now, it was 2 days. The pads weren't on. He hasn't had to tackle anybody yet.
Right.
We're going to see a lot more of that over 13 practices. And I don't know where it ends for him. It'd be crazy if they get to April 16th and it looks like Steel Chambers and Chip Trayanum are their two best. Just because of their storylines and the running back part of it. But, Cody Simon and Tommy Eichenberg, others are going to have a say in that. But
yeah,
I just think he's so athletic. And the question that I had for you when we talked about it last week, I don't know how Jim Knowles wants to use those two linebackers. So I asked that question, and then about Trayanum. And if there isn't a big difference for it, boy, those are the two guys who I think, in terms of their measurables and intangibles and physical ability, I think they've got the highest ceiling. And I'm really, really intrigued by what can become of that over the next 5 weeks, and then over the summer and into August.
But here's the thing about Chip Trayanum I really like. He's got that sparkle in his eye when he talks about playing linebacker. I mean,
yes.
That goes a long way with me. I mean, this is a guy who is champing at the bit. I said that I pronounce that extremely clearly, because champing at the bit's the correct term.
Sure.
Who is champing at the bit to go out there and hit somebody, And the interesting thing is, real quick, I don't know when I don't know if you've run that story, when that story I wrote about Jim Knowles and basically being this teacher, but also the way he's teaching tackling. It's probably going to run later this week. I'm not sure, but the point is, Jim Knowles is a smart guy, like Joshua Perry and I talked about in that interview. Of you can teach tackling, without taking guys to the ground. And I think with some of these linebackers who want to make their point that they're the guy, that they should be one of those two guys.
Yeah,
it's going to be hard to keep them from taking people to the ground. It's going to be an interesting, I think, practice. I think you agree, right? Because they know, man, there's two spots open, and they want to be one of those two spots. I mean, like you said, Tommy Eichenberg was the defensive MVP of the Rose Bowl. That was legit, in my opinion. We saw Steel Chambers. Cody Simon was hurt, is coming back. Mitchell Melton, of course, we're seeing him out there running around with those at the defensive end, possibly that Leo spot. But there's a lot of guys who you talked about a while ago about the defensive backs. They want to be on the field. They understand the urgency involved, and they're all for it.
Yeah, and I don't think that at any of these positions that Jim Knowles or Ryan Day, to a greater extent, would say, well, we're going to find these two linebackers and they're going to play every single snap.
Right,
That's
exactly.
not realistic in the way college football is being played anymore. You're on the field 70, 80, 90 plays. You're not going to survive that way. And they're not going to ask, either one of them to do it. And that's why I think,
Yeah.
maybe there will be just a gradual development, the same way the Steel Chambers early on in the year, you'd see him make plays and say, well, why isn't he out there every single snap or more snaps? It seems like these other guys are rotating, they're doing drives. Well, he still needed a little bit of time to get his feet under him.
Yeah.
And maybe that'll still be the case with Trayanum. Who knows? But he does have the advantage that Steel Chambers didn't, which is that he made this move purposefully and consciously in December, and went through January and February to build his body and change it to be a linebacker, and now has March and April to play linebacker in practice. And then that summer was really when Steel Chambers fully committed to it. And we saw what happened from there.
Yeah.
Well, this should or could give Trayanum a head start over what Steel Chambers had. We'll see. But that's why I really believe he's just for me right now, the player that I'm most curious about how his development will go.
I agree 100%. And by the way, before we go, go ahead.
Yeah, I'm just saying, because another one of these guys, when we're talking about 1 through 85, there's no doubt physically. There's just no doubt.
Yeah.
So then what does the coaching staff do with it? How does he take that coaching? How quickly does it translate to the field? That's the part that we don't know, and it will be fun to track as that goes along. Yeah.
And real quick, we were talking about smart guys, Harry Miller, intelligence. Man, every time you talk to Jim Knowles, and, boy, you just hope it translates, but golly, I mean, this guy, I like the way he communicates, man. Like I talked about in that story, communication, being able to teach is the heart of it all. You may be the smartest guy walking around, as Ryan Day said, you may be the smartest guy walking around, but if you can't teach it what you're almost useless, except for being, in your own little world. And Jim Knowles, man, just comes across as that enlightened, always looking for a new way to maybe do things, going from practicing tackling the old way to practicing tackling the new way as he delineates. I mean, that's intriguing, isn't it? What you're going to see as you and Berm and Spencer Holbrook and I talked about, seeing him working with what you call top level material, finally about as good as you can get. It's going to be intriguing to see how he evolves, how he utilizes that material. You agree, right?
Yeah. And his press conferences are must watch. I mean, I guess I sound like a broken record on this stuff, but if you can't or won't describe it, teach it, convey it, give your philosophies and let the media explain it. And it's not perfect. That doesn't apply in every single situation, but it's certainly here when there's 30, 40, 50 people there hanging on every word. If you're not yourself in that setting, I would think it'd be hard in a closed door, back in the woody in a defensive meeting to do it there. I mean, you don't have to open up the playbook for us. You're teaching 400 level back there, and all of us are sitting out there 100 level.
Coach, what's a 3 technique?
That's right. We're not meant to understand the game at the level that he does.
Yeah.
And Bobby Carpenter brought this up on Lettermen Live this week, and it was a good explanation for this as well. It's you have to be able to, teach at different levels to different understanding.
Exactly.
And I think he presents everything in a way that makes it easier to understand.
Yeah.
And even when he's just talking Doug LeMarie says, well, what do you call these positions? You have the adjuster and the bandit, and then the very clever nickel.
Yeah.
Well, and this is why we call it that. And what the responsibilities are. He's extremely sharp, and it's really enjoyable to listen to him and learn from him. And we're going to get to do it a lot more this spring and into the fall, I'm sure.
Yeah.
And I'm really keep using that word today. I'm entertained by him, but I'm also intrigued and curious and want to learn because
you want to hear more. I mean, that's my deal. I always I've left those moments with him wanting to hear more, And by the way, adjuster, I walked up later and said, you need to change that to fixer, like Harvey Keitel and Pulp Fiction or something. I think adjuster. I don't know. There's just, huh?
Yeah, I
don't like that one. I don't like that one. Huh?
I said, a couple of years ago, they called Jordan Fuller the eraser back there.
There you go.
Because he's saying adjusting things on the field. And I said, well, if things are wrong, you are erasing the mistakes.
Yeah.
And you're trying to erase plays at the end. And he's like, yeah, you're right, but it's the adjuster. I think it's cool. And I'm like, all right, cool.
Okay. I just think it pales in comparison to Bandit, or even Nickel for that matter. Yeah. He'll come up with something clever for it, I'm sure. But ladies and gentlemen, we've slid into a home plate here, the end of yet another Tim May podcast. And I always appreciate my co-pilot, Austin Ward. I call him Awesome Ward when we're off the air, kind of like Maverick, from Top Gun. Awesome's his call sign. But Austin, thank you once again, my man. We'll be back to talk more about Ohio State spring football and maybe even the Wyoming Cowboys big roundup as they head perhaps to the Sweet 16. Just think about it, man. We could be sitting here next week and your team could be in the Sweet 16. We didn't even bring up Ohio State real quick. Wasn't it kind of maybe disheartening for Ohio State fans to see their team get invited to the big dance, seated number 7, and be rated immediately as an underdog to the number 10 Chicago Loyola? What do you think? You think if they get a couple of those players back, Zed Key, Cal Young, I think could be a different team, could make a little bit of a run. What's your brief take on that?
Tim, I was told
I went from one thing to another there. I don't know if you noticed as I got into that thought there.
I was told after my column on Friday just to stick to football. People don't, apparently I'm not equipped to be able to talk about other things going on in the athletic department.
You know what though? Sometimes when you write a story and it says the sun is hot, some people are going to disagree with you. Go ahead now.
I know. I didn't think what I wrote was really as controversial as people seem to think it is, but
no,
I think that this is it. Like, if they're not fully healthy, Ohio State's going to have problems winning on Friday at 12. I mean, that's just a simple matter. We've seen that against teams that are much less talented even than Loyola.
Yeah.
What happened against Nebraska, what happened against Maryland, what happened against Penn State.
Or Roberts last year. Yeah, without Cal Young. Yeah.
Losses simply should not happen. People want to point to the injuries, and I get it. It's an important part of the equation in this conversation, but you still have one of the best players, of recent memory for Ohio State and E.J. Liddell. You've still had Malachi Branham out there. Those two players were better than anybody Penn State had on the roster, better than Nebraska had on the roster, better than Maryland had on the roster. Those guys can win you games. And now if those two give you elite performances from start to finish, Ohio State can win that game. Yeah. I don't know what they'll do if they get to Sunday, but we've seen players get hot. And if E.J. Liddell is at 100% and on that mission, Ohio State can surprise people. But more often than not, it's gone the other way for this program recently. And Chris Holtmann's not been able to get them into the second weekend. I don't think that this is going to be an exception, and that's why I think that different conversations need to be had when you're weighing a contract extension. I don't know what Chris Holtmann has done to merit that, especially if he still has 3 years remaining on that deal. And I know that you don't base evaluations in college basketball off of one game or 1 week or 1 month. But at some point you have to achieve something of consequence. And that could happen this week. I'm not saying it won't.
Yeah.
But you don't win on Friday, I think that's a hot seat conversation that is real.
I tell you what I'd like to have seen, what really bothered me about this team down the stretch was taking nice leads and then just blowing them. I mean, in what in essence was the fourth quarter, sometimes late fourth quarter of games, and just, wow, that's just like, that's on your resume, that you can't finish, and thing I would fix, like you hope they get Zed Key, Cal Young back just so they are close to 100%. We'll see how that goes. Cal Young's obviously dealing, it appears to be, with concussion problems, and Zed Key with a sprained ankle. But my point is, I would love to see, for example, Adele attack the hoop more. I mean, just physically get after it And, just those are little things that they could change going into Chicago Loyola that could just change the way the other team is having to play them, et cetera. Just wow. Because I still think the makings are there, believe it or not, for them to get to the Sweet 16 if they get their act together and then finish the play. Yeah. They're not finishing. They've got to get the act, but then you got to get the 4 acts together and finish it. And that analogy is running flat there, that theatrical analogy, but I still think it's there, and so we'll see where it goes. But boy, kudos to the Ohio State women's hockey team making the Frozen Four. You only have to do one game to do it, but hey, what the heck, right? And the Ohio State women's basketball team for making the big dance. Those are achievements, man. And this might be, who knows, Ohio State women's hockey may be the best women's hockey team in the country. And Gene Smith is somewhere smiling right now about what could be coming down the pike. Could be a national championship before you know it, right?
But that's the reason why I write what I write about Chris Holtmann and the Ohio State basketball program right now. Because,
yeah, I know you do.
Because you look across campus, and I know it's not every program can be held to the football standard. That's fine. Not going to compare the two. I know they're different. But if you're looking at the rest of the athletic department, which I feel is the best athletic department in the entire country and has more money than virtually anybody else and has more to offer athletes now, especially in the name, image, and likeness era, than anywhere else. You look at every other program on campus, when it's not meeting a championship standard, they make changes. They're not content to let any program, any of 30-plus teams sink to the bottom half of their league. And now, Ohio State didn't do that in men's basketball. They are still in the NCAA tournament. They still won 20 games. But I also don't think that there's any case to be made that they're expected to win championships and at the level that other, women's hockey wasn't there. They made a change, made a great hire. Look what's happened to them now.
Yeah.
Lacrosse that we've talked about. When they're building all of these incredible facilities, men's tennis, women's tennis, whatever. Every program in the Ohio State Athletic Department is given the support and the resources to win at the absolute highest level. And that includes men's basketball, which is why it's puzzling that you would accept fringe top 25 and making the tournament every year as a success.
Yeah.
And if you're giving Chris Holtmann an extension based off of that, you're basically just saying you're completely okay with that, and you don't think that Final Fours, Big Ten championships, or a national championship are required to meet expectations for that job. And that's the part that I have the hardest part with. Yeah. Because that's not the case for anywhere else on Ohio State's campus.
Yeah. Well, I think the bottom line, we'll leave it this too, like you just touched on. Ohio State has 36 varsity sports. And like you talked about, Alabama, you look around the country, most universities don't have anywhere near that, and but these sports are fully funded, meaning they should be competitive. Basketball is fully funded. It's got as nice a practice facility as almost anybody. I don't know how better a practice facility you got to have than what they've got. It's right. You know what I'm talking about. All the ingredients are there, including the financial backing. And like you said, there's no. Now, you do get injuries in basketball, which totally change your team. It's not like football. It's you can lose one key player and can totally change the makeup of your basketball team. That's what's different about basketball from almost every other sport. And I understand all that too. But you're right. There does come a time, what's that old line? Fish or cut bait, lead, follow, or get the hell out of the way. But go ahead.
Here's the part about that I find amusing. And it's just, one or two people that wanted to bring it up, and that's fine too, about the injuries and the different standards and football versus basketball. And so, well, if Gunnar Hoke had to finish a season 2 years ago instead of Justin Fields, I think this person said, I think Ohio State fans would have understood that. I said, I completely disagree with you.
Yeah.
If that situation had come to pass and Gunnar Hoke had to go out there and save the season, there would have been a ridiculous outcry. How in the world did Ohio State let its roster get in this situation where one injury to Justin Fields ruins the entire program? this is a championship standard. You don't get a free pass for an injury. Like football expectations don't make wiggle room for that.
Yeah.
For injuries. They expect the roster to be built to withstand that. And when we've talked about in the past, like with Ohio State's defense, and we would put in context how young they are. Like, I don't remember a lot of people saying, "Oh gosh, well, you're right. They are young. That they shouldn't fire all their defensive coaches. It is okay. Never mind. I'm fine with 2 losses now." No, that's not the response to that at all.
No, you're not fine with them lining up incorrectly. That's what you're not fine with. Go ahead.
That part, yeah, but that is why they were fired.
Yeah.
They weren't fired because they were inexperienced in the youth. That's the stuff that you understand and get behind. Yeah. And that's what I think, I understand that Kyle Young and Zed Key are important. I'm not pretending like that isn't a factor in the last 2 or 3 weeks. I know that it is. But I'm saying the way that it is viewed and evaluated is extremely different than what would happen if the injuries were hitting Ohio State football. And maybe that will always be how it is and they'll never change. That's fine. Like, just say so.
Yeah.
But don't pretend like you're like, what's Chris Holtmann, 2nd or 3rd highest paid coach in the Big Ten? That you pay that amount in this conference where Michigan State has proven it can win a title. Michigan's getting to Final Fours, Indiana's history, Wisconsin getting, to high level and Final Fours. Like, this is a good basketball league. And if you're paying Chris Holtmann that amount of money, that should mean that he's able to win championships. And he's come close.
Yeah.
He's done a fine job. But I think the expectation, that doesn't match Ohio State expectations in my mind.
Yeah, I got you, man. Your mind.
That also doesn't mean I think he should be fired. I don't.
Yeah.
And he's not going to be. So that doesn't even matter.
The interesting mind of Austin Ward. Boy, we started this whole conversation talking about Harry Miller and thoughts in his head. Joshua Perry letting you know thoughts in his head. We got Austin Ward's thoughts in his head.
It's a dangerous place.
I thought as Austin was going on there was duh. No, the expectations, man, they are real, and we'll see where it goes. But for Austin Ward, finally after that digression, and that was a true digression. You agree?
Yeah, you got me going on that.
No, I know. I love it, man. I just hope people, just keep listening, man. Keep on keeping on when it comes to listening, because just when I get to the end, there could be a whole new chapter, ladies and gentlemen, every week. That's why I like my buddy, Austin Ward. Awesome call sign. But until next week, I'm going to sign off real quickly here before we get going on another contrail. Next week for Austin Ward, this is Tim May. We'll see you then.